Oh, HeartGold and SoulSilver, you beautifully foul creature. What is your deal? On one hand, probably the most or second most overhyped Pokemon games there ever were. But on the other hand, being a complete drag that overstays its welcome and continues as a remake to fall victim to the same pits as the games it's based on, if not harder. Yet, simultaneously, again, from a critical perspective, manages to be the most middle-of-the-line experience for the entire series. Yes, it's truly bewildering for the uninformed, but that's partially my own fault. I've previously looked at these games and poisoned the well quite a bit when it came to not really criticizing the game, but instead having some silly little rant-like thing where nothing was really elaborated. The ultimate crime. So today, that's why we're back. To actually explain why Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver both succeed as a remake, but also fumble as a remake pretty hard at the same time. Because no, it's not all black and white. And now, I'm not here to drain the poison from the well. Oh no, on the contrary. I'm here to blow it the hell up instead. Let's go. Starting us off, our Johto remake journey has to go, well, there to Johto, and Kanto too, I guess. But with the notes from the top, the same as the last, of course, here we have the single most underbaked region there ever was. Because despite being less so in the remake, Johto is still pretty small size-wise. Not that it really matters outside of size measuring contests, still feeling like 4/5 of an actual region. It is a land of simplicity. Towns that just feel normal and thankfully lack complexity. Routes that are overly grassy and feel pretty samey as a result. And of course, being the little brother to the region that people unfortunately care about more. Because yes, Big Brother Kanto returns as well, overlooking what people would argue is far too much of the Johto experience. Johto takes the main game, and Kanto takes a pseudo post-game, more of a second act type of approach to the game. The differences between the two lands ain't all that unique outside of music and gameplay. Similar appearance-wise to an extent of mind-numbingness, similar structure-wise with open-endedness, despite one being far superior, and similar in questionable quality. Although unlike the original games, Johto is not the superior region here. Although again, gameplay stepping in. For a start, in the regional quality department, we got mid and ew. But with our next twist, the fates almost flip entirely. In terms of the land, both regions actually get more meat on the bone. Kanto with restored areas, and Johto with actual new content. In Johto's case, we get a minor expansion of relevance, giving us actual unique terrain and sights to see. Small areas were even added to give the rock climb HM some relevance, and Mount Silver even sees a massive overhaul to make it a much more interestingly designed dungeon, featuring weather. Wow, crazy how something so small and impactful is actually in the game now. And this is before other minor area reworks that frankly don't matter as much. Johto itself feels more alive, and Kanto itself doesn't even get left out in regards to fun either. Mainly because Kanto gets its own main areas for the Gen 1 games restored, where GSC had initially buried them and pissed on their graves. Viridian Forest and technically Route 2 are actual locations now rather than a freak abomination. Cerulean Cave comes back as a post-16 badge gameplay dungeon to keep the flow of content going, and as well the Seafoam Islands become an actual dungeon, instead of just being one room. But the best part of the Seafoam Islands is that false hope of a new path that you can go through when playing through Kanto, but it doesn't matter because the path is blocked off, defeating the purpose. Cool! How fun! You know, alongside more small stuff including other rock climb shenanigans, and similar to Johto, some new gym layouts. Although they definitely skipped the one that mattered most, while simultaneously making 2 actual gym layouts instead of just empty rooms now. All of which truly help the games feel more finished this time around, rather than feeling pretty rushed. One thing that could have used a second look, or even 3, is the game's backtracking issues. Now, it's not the worst, but the back and forths you gotta do to hop through the game just isn't very pleasant. The game has about 6 to 7 cases of this, once halfway through the game with the lighthouse potion fetching, twice with the radio tower, the story to and from, thrice with the Kimono Girl detour, both before and after coming back to New Bark Town, 5th with the second trip to the power plant, and of course minor trips to Cinnabar and Blue's Battle, alongside Professor Oak's lab. Now obviously, being in a game like Pokemon, most of these issues are technically obsolete due to fast travel, but without it, yeah, good luck. Speaking of fast travel though. The remake does such a good job at making this nonsense tolerable, because previously flying between the two regions was a headache to say the least. You took a train, a boat, or you walked between the two regions and those were your only outs. This was inconvenient to say the very least. But now, we still have some limitations, but it's a lot better, as now you can just fly to either region with ease from the Pokemon League area of the map. So sure, you have to stop halfway because going from one raw end to the other just isn't possible, but this absolutely clears in the speed and accessibility department, and downright might be one of the single greatest things the remake does differently. It absolutely needs to be noted, although most wouldn't make that argument because they're too busy playing the game one-handed thanks to the running shoes toggle. Imagine running, but no longer needing to hold down the B button. While not always optimal, it sure is welcome, which leaves us here with end the section out. We got one bit. You know where it is, everyone's favorite, HMs, and they of course are still unfun. As a remake, basically any issue is still intact from the originals. Rock Smash and Fly are again optional, meaning 6 HMs are truly needed to beat the game. 5 for the Johto section, with the new inclusion of Rock Climb just for Kanto at the very end, while of course retaining 2 from the Johto section. Now, of course, something like this eats into the team building department, with needing to have permanent fast travel, the above average need for kites, 3 different water moves you need to slot in. It's never going to be pleasant. But you know what is pleasant? That one HM that got an altered obtaining method, as strength was moved away from the very missable house to a random dude that you will never miss, while also just being required later in the game. It's truly thrilling. With the regions themselves, it's a step up. How much of a step is up to interpretation though, but truly up. Meaning, wow, no way, a crazy pivot to the gameplay of HeartGold and SoulSilver, but the good end of it. The big obvious step forward that HeartGold SoulSilver brings is of course its modernization of the previously mediocre mechanical side of what Gold and Silver was, and here they adapted it to arguably the single best generation, mechanically speaking, we've ever had. So here we're going to see everything, or damn near close to it, that these games adapted from the modern at the time games, and brand new stuff where very little that they brought to the table. So first, the Gen 4 stuff to observe the hypothetical peak we're supposed to be seeing. So for our lengthy list of changes, let's start. First, we got the physical special split, of course being a subcategory for attacks dictating which stat damage is actually calculated from, allowing for basically everything to benefit more from their options they have available, mainly so types are not the deciding factor in how an attack has its damage dealt, but rather the moves in question, meaning most Pokemon are no longer being limited, so greater potential and optimization are definitely on the table. The massive stat changes with the EV system to properly optimize or find some interesting use cases for Mons through even greater customization in a more limited system, whereas the old system in GSC just kind of ended up diluting stats as a whole. But here, so much customization exists to an unfathomable extent. Limited in stat points, you're not able to just max out 6 stats. You only get 2, even less if you want to spread those stats out more. The IV system changes don't really change that much though in the grand scheme of things, other than offering more number ranges to make your Mons worse, alongside many small battle alterations like a buff to freeze thaw rates, a very important rest talk nerf, the addition of double in multi-battles, among loads of items giving a much needed variety boost outside of just leftovers, and more leftovers, and the junk of course to fill slots. Abilities, of course, are here to ensure that even the worst Pokemon have gameplay niches, and of course with that, Emerald's addition of random out-of-battle features on top of abilities as well. Super important to feed into the breeding buff that passes natures down easily, alongside the extra step of baby Pokemon. Extra uses exist also outside of breeding for genders, primarily different sprites for the Mons, and evolution. Actually, a lot of new evolution methods, because Kingdra and friendship-based Mons simply were not annoying enough already. Mons actually have a weight stat now for a few attacks, you have a pseudo achievement tracker in the game, and of course new attacks in Pokemon. Duh! And that should be all minus some glitches. In terms of all the steps to really perfect the gameplay and add a few extra things that truly put Gen 4, or specifically HeartGold SoulSilver, among the top in terms of mechanical bliss. All at the minimal cost of boss trainers talking in battles sometimes. Of course ignoring how long the HP bars take to drop. But the best part of it all, HeartGold SoulSilver actually lacks some something the Gen 4 Sinnoh games have, the fog weather. They literally took something great and took the blemish out back like Old Yeller. Mechanically speaking, and our in theory talk here, it's just goated. Among the best the series has, top 3 mechanically speaking for sure. Like, what is it even competing with? Gen 9? Gen 8 but Dynamax-less? It's pretty damn nice how well it's been able to hold up for sure. But if catching up to former modern day was all we had here, maybe we can move on to the 3 back-to-back sections eating up my entire script page and more. But there's actual new stuff here, and because of that, we continue. In terms of things HeartGold SoulSilver do unique to them and introduced for the series, there's really not much. As such, we only have 3 total talking points here for exclusive bits. The first minor change the game sprinkles in is for breeding, as now giving a certain family of items to a Mon will let you breed down a set IV to its children Pokemon, making Mons of course better and easier when you're needing to optimize stats. Although, like breeding itself, it still technically lacks main game practicality, mostly being relevant for endgame stuff like battle facilities. Of course, being a useful update that only improves the game on a very small scale. Although when we pivot over to the Mon specific stuff, we got 2 talking points. Whoa, crazy! And they both bleed into minor inconveniences. As with the Arceus event, we get access to the 3 cover art legends from the other Gen 4 games. The trick here is the fact that this is the only way to get the Grisius Orb in the game ever, due to it being a trade-locked item. Meaning an important form-changing item is essentially event only, meaning in terms of finding a definitive feature-packed game for the game's battle system, your choices without events either require you to sacrifice the Rotom appliances with Platinum to have Giratina origin form, or with HeartGold SoulSilver sacrifice Giratina in favor of the funny washing machine. Never to get both because Game Freak doesn't actually love you with these nonsensical restrictions. HGSS also brings us an exclusive event Pichu. Outside of being unable to evolve in its unique spray, it's not too special, but it's sadly stuck with a similar fate of being trapped here forever. No, not even Gen 5 could save it. It's held hostage on this game. So yeah, that's it. Them's all the ideas and theoreticals the game has. So let's just quickly shove off to your favorite part of these videos, actually playing through the game. Oh fun, lucky us, the worst part of the game. Unfortunately, in an analysis, the Johto end of HeartGold and SoulSilver fall flat on their faces very similarly to the originals, just less so. Alright, starting off my mind-numbing over-analysis, we gotta go to the Mons. And due to the way we're splitting the gameplay section in half here, we're just looking at the pre-credits offering, so the Pokédex itself is something we can throw straight in the trash. Unfortunately, there's inconsistencies there in what is and isn't available during the main Johto section of the game, for catching and battling purposes. Due to this, we'll just look at what you can use. And after culling through this mess of a dex, after taking into consideration different encounter pools, the Safari Zone, and the removal of unobtainable evolution items and breeding tools for Mons that should exist here but don't because game design too hard, we have about 220 Pokemon to use during Johto without external means when we add the 2 versions together. With extra stuff on the table, being the Pokewalker and this bum here, it is 224. And this is in a dex of level issues, one that doesn't allow you to fully evolve 2 of the Pokemon by the time you reach the champion, unless you're over leveling of course. Copious trade Mons, region specific Mons, still not obtainable in the region they were discovered in. 2 versions of the game, yet one of them actually has more Mons obtainable within them, and full evolution lines technically not featured, despite roughly 18 extra Mons existing that did not exist prior, and that being the reason they're absent, ignoring the fact some are actually usable in the game, also despite the fact that they were shoved in the post-game content as well. While it may seem negative, at least the count clears Ruby and Sapphire in that regard. And there's still stuff here that are faux exclusive as well, and more game to come that we'll see later. For a region that's not that large, all things considered, it's not too bad, of course, ignoring the quality. Not that quality really matters outside of the battles granted, especially with the count being a larger number, barely in terms of new things, and the same could be said for what GSC refused to give you. But hey, quality control. The idea here works to an extent, but feels mildly frustrating. Although, as we'll see later, it's sadly an idea better handled on paper than execution. But hey, let's touch up a tad bit in the Mons department, because different. Headbutt, as before, is an encounter tool, unique to the region, with Rock Smash holding up in a similar manner, but with item chances for extra Mons later because fossils never existed before. But all in all, that's about it for the Mons shenanigans. So for us at this point, Johto's wacky progression. Okay, so get this. paths. Johto itself is a mostly linear experience with a very notable non-linear-ish experience during the mid-game of the region. We get what's mostly a straight line into some goofy-looking circle of world to reach the upper part of the region. Gyms 1 through 4 end up in this mostly linear section, and generally speaking, they work well enough. Now, with a little bit of extra forced content in terms of the rival battle at the Burn Tower being mandatory, alongside your one-way ticket to race Snorlax later, now no longer being half missable. When we get our split courtesy of the 4th gym badge letting you surf, 2 paths are made to feign the idea of freedom of choice and non-linear-ish gameplay. You get the ability to grab any of these 3 badges in any order you want, before being roped back into non-linearity, jumping back into the land that we've been to before, but with a forced distraction now, before being off to fetch that last gym badge, and being forced into a detour after fetching the Master Ball, because of course, people never got the legendary they bought the damn game for. So now, this somewhat helpful into not actually helpful distraction just really ends up turning into bloat, almost necessary because how short Johto ends up being, but from there, it's just another straight line to the Pokemon League, and then the credits. That's it for the main game progression. Linear, not linear, linear, random detour, back to linear. This is the mess that Johto is. It would work, but the level curve sadly does not allow for that to happen. Yeah, it's a funny idea, but an unfortunate truth. Johto's previous efforts were without a doubt the single worst level curve a Pokemon game has ever been shipped with, or damn near close to it. So with a second chance, Adderall, and extra games under their belt, we gotta ask, did they fix the game's level curve? A little, but in the grand scheme of things, not really. But in Johto specifically, it's very unnoticeable despite obvious changes, whereas Kanto at least has very obvious level adjustments that we'll see in great depth later. As always, we begin at level 5, get a rival battle and a few trainers around 2 to 4 in level on the immediate areas around Violet City, before facing newly forced content cluttered with level 3s and barely above, helping a way to level into Faulkner, where we see an upgrade on his 7 to 9 squad to 9 and 13. While it's not a bad improvement granted the new content, that's just for the Pidgey. The Pidgeotto definitely got too much in level, and it starts to show, mainly because of its moveset, but we'll get to that later. Which, gee, I hope they keep up with that momentum of making the level curve better. With Bugsy, we see a team-wide 1 level increase, in contrast to GSC, capping at 17, backed by Rival 2 getting 2 for everyone, peaking at 18. Then we get Whitney going from Gen 2's cap of 20, increased by -1. Yeah, for some reason we dropped to 19 already, using that Sprout Tower level dip as toilet paper and just tossing it out. And by Morty and Rival 3, it's just a copy and paste of what Gen 2 had prior, up to 25 and 22 respectively. Of course, now Rival 3 is forced in contrast to the originals, making no impact on the level curve, but from here, everything just collapses. And it's not even because any semblance to fix the level curve exists, but of course their pitiful attempt at non-linearities here, because here the game has to come to a screeching halt because you need to go down either path at any given point, once being reached, but water at least somewhat prevents early access to each area in greater length, which assumes you need to beat this new tragically underleveled battle that's only a level 12 coughing, just already a complete shadow of something we already did before the second gym, while generally being a direct downgrade from the old Kimono Girls fight. Regardless, assuming in the recommended gym order, we can go straight to Chuck. There are no detours, it's a straight path. He caps at 31 immediately, despite lacking in obvious forced trainers and the water route issue of trainers struggling to match or surpass Whitney at times. And this is supposed to tiptoe you over to Jasmine with a casual 4-level jump, with a few trainers implied that you may or may have not have fought before or after Chuck, but also simultaneously probably 0 between the two. It's a jump that almost makes you want to do price first and abandon that freedom of choice that you valued so damn much in terms of the game, on a theoretical basis. Because yes, freedom of choice is a bit of a meme, one that I have clowned on too many times on at this point, if you ask me personally. So you head east and get a level curve whiplash of Route 38's trainers, because you could be hypothetically progressing here sooner than just now. But then with the Rocket Hideout in consideration, only one fight before Price's gym even has a single team that peaks past Morty's in level. And then Price himself is just washed up at 34, which sure is a notable increase from what Gen 2 had, with 3s across the board, but he's still lower than Jasmine. And assuming the recommended gym order is just not progression. So yeah, congrats to Price. His levels are actually good this time around. But again, similarly to the other path, the EXP gain is just not making things work well at all. Even if you sit here and grind the copy and pasted Team Rocket grinds. Once one side is done, you're just twiddling your thumbs because the other side of progression is the same destination, meaning you're mainly just playing catch up with the rest of your mons level-wise. This mid-game stagnates, and it's very noticeable. If it stopped here, maybe it could be fine, but shortly after we get the radio tower stuff to get flooded with trivial battles with mid-20s everywhere. Boss trainers show up, and surprise, they fail to surpass Jasmine. Yes, Rival 4 included, only ever being surpassed on the final battle here. And then we go forward with a side capping at 30s at best, right into a gym that caps at 41, increased by 1 since GSC, because at this point there may as well be no logical sense with the level curve at all. The pacing needs to go from nothing to something in the matter of seconds. By the time the gym challenge is over, 41 is the highest we see, and the normal trainers are drowning in neglect, enough to where they're forced to cheat levels on generic trainers to make true late game foes appear because they forgot to make number go up. Obviously, it's at its worst on Route 45 when the trainers you see post radio tower cannot even surpass level 30. Afterwards, we get a delayed battling session trying to sneak its way at the end and maybe get a level up if you're lucky. And then off to Kanto you go, surpassing the slot for generic trainers because again, they can't even hit 38 as a bar. And all of this to have the final boss fight with the rival before the Pokemon League. And no, not even he surpasses Claire level-wise, because they wrote him off as just a generic trainer rather than the boss fight he is. Congrats, a storm is approaching, and oh boy, Elite 4 level laddering is at its most simple and obvious. That unfun act of the boss gauntlet gradually having higher leveled mons as you progress through them, meaning the level you aim to go in for either over-succeed and trivialize the gauntlet, or arbitrarily make it harder through larger number over time. It's impossible to really pick without something being inflated or deflated depending on how much time you want to waste grinding. A lot like the entire game. More obviously an issue here. But whatever, 42, 44, 46, and 47 with team averages obviously being lower than those points, with the team's own level gaps becoming issues over time. Just look at the levels on Karen's Houndoom and Umbreon. That's all you need for a comparison, which finally gives us the champ battle, where 4 of those mons are higher levels than they were in Gen 2. It still caps at 50 despite having more forced content in the game somehow, which it's honestly a bad thing because now it's tied with a wild Pokemon now, which a Magikarp that can trivialize the entire game, by the way. Listen, if it were just the trainers being all over the place, then maybe we'd be eating a stale chocolate cake. But I haven't even mentioned the part where that cake isn't even chocolate, but dirt instead, due to the wild encounters being horribly level, as of course they need to be lower than the generic trainers, who are already deprived of any potential they could have, if not being similarly leveled. With your best grinding options for battling mid-40s, you get mons 10 levels lower to ensure you're EXP deprived, punishing you for your long-term use of teams of mons greater than just 1, for both the upkeep over the span of the game and adding newbies, with the most obvious example of using a new mon and being punished for it immediately being a level 23 Electrode, when it's going to feel like complete garbage when you need to grind for a price in his level 30 pluses. The EXP system, as always, for any game pre-Gen 6 is a plague trying to keep you away from the main game due to filler game time, and somehow it only gets worse. But before worse, I got some explaining to do regarding Johto's non-linearity attempt just not working, because without staring at it like paint drying, it's kind of something you just write off immediately. And yes, this applies to GSC as well, because duh, Johto games. So with freedom of choice, we begin entering a critique for the first time because immediately there's an issue with freedom and progression, because you're supposed to go do plot and then beat the gym. Ta-da! Grab the Surf HM and your freedom begins. There are several problems here. The first one is simply the path that you choose is just very non-committal, because you can go to Olivine and do whatever you want, or even go to Mahogany Town to pick up one of your 3 team members. But obviously, much like certain actions in life, you can pull out at any time, meaning if the game gets too tough for you, you can just go to the Lake of Rage immediately, play through the Rocket Hideout, and take the Funny Ball, maybe the Choice Specs too, and jump ship straight to Chuck or the Lighthouse. And in the other route's case, Lighthouse stuff, and more importantly, not only are you grabbing loot, potential partners, but regardless of route, you're grabbing levels. The biggest reason a system like this without faux scaling levels fails is because you're always making progress, pushing ever further away from the pitifully low-level trainers, something that similarly plagued the Kanto games. And it's even worse pre-Morty, as the same ideas apply minus gyms. You pull up, and instead of doing the Burn Tower rival fight, you can just go left and grab your Miltank, or go right and get your Giraffe Rig, bulldoze through every trainer in sight while you're at it, and then steamroll the story that you just ignored. Yeah, most games of Pokemon have this issue of just letting you go a little bit further than intended, but here it's at its worst. Kanto has far less of a straightforward structure, so it's hardly an issue there, but with Johto, the pacing issues and the lack of commitment just just really make your choices mean nothing at all. To see why it's done wrong, we need to use a game for comparison that does non-linearity correctly. And thankfully, there actually was a commenter who actually pointed this out before in the comments. And that game that we're going to use, that arguably did it the best of any game ever, is none other than Mega Man 2. A game that pulls its metaphorical peeper out and slams it on the table by letting you pick between a set of 8 maps in a non-linear structure before moving on to more in a linear structure. You start with your funny lemon shooter, and from beating bosses and to an extent the stage itself, you will get new gear, and it's the only way. There's no half-assing a stage and then bailing to get rewards, which is another thing that not having a level system will do, only hoping that mid-stage that you actually have one of the game's abilities to gain access to new areas that you could not before, and likely get rewarded handsomely with a robot chug jug, or even extra lives. Ultimately, the big deal was commitment to do the stage, and the rewards to get new tricks to eventually beat all the stages, and then going into your linear gauntlet to beat the game, where the stages are now built around you having everything. The game is completely built on non-linear to linear. And sure, the two games are completely different in terms of genre. It's important to take away some of the principles Mega Man 2 did right, mainly in how it rewards players with its non-linearity. Looking back at Johto though, it's all the rewards of giving up halfway with basic items, encounters, levels of course, and even the Safari Zone as a feature, not needing to beat the gyms to get them. Meanwhile, your actual rewards for beating the gym leaders are locked down to the obvious TM rewards, Chuck with an optional HM, Jasmine with literally nothing, and Price with an HM that actually has some minor use, although that's mainly for when the paths converge, which of course is an imbalance that actually jingles the keys towards Price first, which feeds into another non-linearity issue. The split just doesn't last long at all, only being 3 gym badges in length with a lack of content to show for it, averaging less than 30% of Johto's runtime, made worse when it doesn't really provide much outside of a minor replayability boost. Again, for our comparison, we just saw a game with more stages in that non-linear loop than there were outside of it, greater than 50%, making your options far greater while also making them last longer throughout the game. Here, it just ends too fast, hoping that Kanto will pick up the slack later on, where again we see some of the same fumbles apply, minus the HM rewards, just in a context where that entire second act is built around it. This is why having non-linearity in Johto actively takes away from the game. It's not the non-linearity type boost that you truly want, but one that just kills progression and leveling. But for now, the Johto boss teams and their issues to explain why half of these teams are just kind of bad. And first up is the fun one. They gave Faulkner a roost spamming stat ball and sand attack that makes the fight flat out unbearable at times. Yes, this battle can be, and if you're running one mon, will be an attempt at the lottery. Also, it has a distinct lack of any of Johto's common flying types, instead giving us 2 Kanto mons from the same evolution line. This is already a heinous start in terms of making Johto's identity stick out at all, almost like its identity is Kanto or something. Bugsy's team is still a complete joke with 0 Johto mons on display. The Scyther on its own is just super dangerous, and U-turn makes the battle so much greater, especially when it's the last mon standing. Almost in a bad way, as the 2 paperweights really find a way to sour the entire battle. No Lediba, Pineco, Yanma? Seriously? And I'll go ahead and speak for everyone else when I say not a single soul was asking for more Metapod representation. Whitney's team just feels limited by team size, overall being fine, and great for farming posts to reply with skill issue to. Seriously guys, it's really not that hard of a fight. Morty commits the crime of ignoring the only Johto ghost type to milk Kanto's 1 ghost type evolution line for all it's worth, which is even more wicked when you consider that his gym does the exact same thing, one where every mon just plays the same but gradually better with extra stats, really making the movesets the only thing to make these individual mons stick out at all. Our only mentioning of the rival is a de-evolution of GSC's Burn Tower Haunter, probably to balance it for the physical special split. Honestly, this change might actually be good. Price and Jasmine have fine teams, and Claire swapping out a 3rd Dragonair for a non-dragon is fine. Granted, dragons don't really exist in the game, and it kills another dupe. Chuck though, yikes. Having 2 mons like this in the mid-game is tragic. The no Johto Pokemon tax is paid again. It almost makes you wonder why they delayed Hitmontop's existence until Bruno, almost like it's an act of self-sabotage, where yes, even Bruno has a bad team. And it's not just because of the horrible type diversity, where the 4 fighting types have no dual types, but them even willing to break their self-imposed rule of monotype teams with a mon that is terrible at this point in the game. Like a really, really bad one. Almost like Game Freak was allergic to reusing mons that Chuck had. had. Almost like they intentionally avoid giving mons to more than one trainer just to make them feel more unique. Oh wait, that's something they actually do. Right. Will is fine. The dupe is cringe, but at this point we'll just take what we can get. Koga and Karen both suffer from the whole non-monotype thing. Karen because there was no shot they'd have a Tyranitar on her team, limiting her to 4. Although the lack of Sneasel though is just reaching, despite our post-game team having a Weavile, so 3 instead. And for Koga, there's not really an excuse. There's many poison types we could have seen here. Where's the Quillfish at, man? But otherwise, the rest of these teams are honestly pretty solid. Which leaves us with Lance, who, granted the limitations of the dragons in the game, is fine. Granted, we ignore the lack of a Kingdra. Okay, to be fair though, he's the champion. He's not really a dragon type trainer, despite being referred to as one. And of course, if we ignore the existence of those 2 extra bum-ass Dragonite that make his main one feel less special. But in terms of the Johto teams, that's all she wrote. Why this matters so much for a game that takes place in a region, you want them to show off the new mods, at least in some form or fashion, with the boss trainers. And for the Johto region, these are mods that are supposed to be in here. They're supposed to be front and center. They're noticeably lacking representation, only featuring on a few teams just because, as pieces of the region's core identity, which is problematic as a region, as pieces of the region's core identity. It's not Johto, the land of non-linearity and funny gameplay mechanics. It's Johto, Kanto's shadow. But the part that's truly sickening is the fact that we're talking about a remake, a chance to fix these issues instead of carrying them over from GSE, where possible choices like Yanma, for instance, sucked way more back then, but is now a usable mon. But that choice was just mostly ignored. So yeah, sure man, roost spamming Pidgeotto, why not? Thankfully though, this is only half the offering the main game provides, as we've just covered Johto only. So now we get to keep counting a look at the funny, weird, arbitrary stuff to diss the game on, but in Kanto. Congratulations, pal. You did it. You reached the second act of the most gassed Pokemon games to ever exist. What's the treat? Even more slot, baby. Look, to keep it simple, in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, this section of the game was flat out bad. Genuinely being filthy to play through. Unfortunate would not even begin to describe how little care was put into Kanto's gameplay side. Although thankfully with HGSS, they at least learned how to keep the train on the tracks this time. So beginning this off, we're picking back up with the Pokemon offering the game provides. And here, we're going to find out how many mons are available both before Red, so when the game actually ends, and in the game period. So first, as previously mentioned, there's so much going on here in terms of the regional decks and the national decks alike being damn near useless, and counting between Johto, the Kanto region itself, the radio-related junk, and so many other features. There is so much on our table right now that makes counting damn near impossible. So how many mons are there, you ask? Well, we'll take our 224 from earlier, add an extra 37 for the full regional Pokedex, featuring both the missing evolutions and the toddlers, but we're not including the Kanto starters. From the national decks of random Hoenn and Sinnoh Pokemon, we get 73 from the Safari Zone, 13 from the radio music, another 25 from Swarms, another 13 courtesy of headbutt encounters, 10 from the bug catching contest, 20 through that dumb toy the game comes with, 4 from extra fossils, and finally 2 remain because they're apparently needed to be more roaming legendaries, which, if my math didn't randomly exclude a random baby Pokemon or something because counting is hard, brings us to a pre-red total of the weed number plus 1. And post-red, that number is bumped up by 21 because extra starter mons and a few legendaries, for a grand total of 442, which, looking at the math, human error is absolutely showing. It's off by an entire 5 total critters. Yes, I had to count this several times. My math was off. Again, it's a complete mess not worth counting, and you can see why. The math can't math. This lineup, no matter how you slice it, is pretty strong, despite the distribution being a complete mess. Perhaps more messy than your room that you've been neglecting to clean for the past month. But as everything with these games, of course, there's a glaring drawback. And in this case, a rhetorical question was asked to the devs, and it was answered, defeating the entire purpose of it being rhetorical in the first place. Hey, what if some of those mons with special evolution methods just didn't have access to those evolution sources? Well, that's how we get 5 completely different dead slots in the Pokedex that are trade exclusive. Yep, all 4 of the location-based evolutions and the 1 contest stat-based evolution are just completely inaccessible without other games. And let me remind you, all 5 of these mons had their pre-evolutions available before Reddit himself, and 3 of them were actually tied to the previous Johto decks. It's frankly a joke and intentional bad design. Regardless, for the mons, it's a massive sweep across the board. Well, Well, mostly, because new stuff that never existed prior, because Gens 3 and 4 alone. Although it's a massive shame because how much of it's just luck to Kanto. And as for the event stuff, Pain, which lets us get back to the teams of our boss trainers, and the such for the game's second act. As for the mons themselves, it's not bad. In fact, the teams were so well-rounded, only a few complaints are even coming to my crosshair. Janine and Surge featured 2 dupes on their teams of 5, feeling like a letdown. Granted, options absolutely exist. In terms of team changes, only 2 trainers actually had mons tapped out, Janine replacing one of her mucks for another paperweight, and Blue switches the Alakazam for a much worse Machamp, although it's nitpicking because it gives the game better team composition. Like, what's even left at this point? Brock still having the uninvolved Graveler and Rhyhorn, Erica and Surge committing heinous acts of mediocrity with the Magneton, Electabuzz, and Tangela not being fully evolved despite having evolutions, and of course Blaine with his just bad team, of course even featuring a Mon that's not evolved. Yeah, these suck to varying extents, but they're simply the victims of the game trying to remain faithful. Tragic, yeah, but it's the Johto games. Of course it's like this. In Red's case, the team composition feels much better with his overhauled battle. That I do need to rant on later, but yes, the Lapras needs to be here over the Espeon, which just leaves us with the rival. Mount Moon shows us another repeated shortcoming, with Sneasel and Magneton just not being evolved, nor ever with the rematches evolving, although the addition of a tag battle alongside him sure as hell is welcome. If only the leveling for this fight just wasn't so abysmal. Oh yes, gamers, it's time for the Kanto level curve. What was once a complete snorefest level-wise and a complete travesty with outlandishly low levels on every basic trainer and wild Pokemon was made exponentially worse with boss battles, where there were only 2 trainers with Red and Blue ever had levels reaching over the champ fights. Here we see the bare minimum done in order to make these battles far less mind-numbing. So level-wise, we begin roughly high 40s to 50s, picking up from your Pokemon League conquest. And immediately with generic trainers, we see notable level jumps in contrast to Gen 2. Route 8, for instance, pumps essentially 10 levels into everything. They even feature a double battle and have some mons from Gens 3 and 4. Here, we see a route that actually hits all of its bases, meaning the battles are actual content this time. They're not about 20 levels lower than you, despite them being noticeably underleveled. The variety is of course far more interesting, and doubles exist. That's great. Although the trainer quality is all over the damn place at this point in the game. Of course, here I'm going to pick out the big stinkers, because frankly speaking, why? The big stinkers include Fisherman Kyler, only ever having level 18 Magikarps, yes, adding more for his rematch teams and never leveling them up. And of course, Pokefan Joshua's team, level-wise, feeling like the OG games despite having a 9 level bump. And Pokefan Alex simultaneously features level 29s and a 65 on the same team as some kind of sick prank. Just remember the biggest extremes in Kanto. The other regular trainers are not as bad. The wild encounters, against all odds though, managed to beat the allegations of being unusable. So what I would say if these games weren't too faithful, and this part specifically still being a stain on the game, as of course they are still pitifully underleveled, meaning unfortunately, like the OG game, this makes picking up mons in Kanto for use mostly irrelevant, considering the grim amount of grinding you'll be forced to make in order to make those mons work in the first place, criminally making that massive amount of mons previously mentioned completely obsolete. Unless wasting hours, potentially days, grinding sounds fun. Yes, they somehow found a way to ruin that beautiful roster they spent so much time building up, and I spent gassing all for nothing. But you're not getting a Baltoy, Starly, Suicune, or a fossil Pokemon, or even the level 40 plus mons from the Safari Zone, but to a lesser extent, without wasting a day or two grinding each and every one of them up, which again is just the game punishing you for wanting to use more Pokemon, which that finally leads us to the boss trainers. Due to Kanto's significantly more open-ended approach, level progression is much more stagnant than what Johto provided, which can work if handled properly, considering progression is still needed to reach other locations in the region itself. So for pacing with teams, Surge opens the game up with a 53 peak. That's great if you couldn't tell, because that makes actual progression since Lance. So we're already on a much better pace than what GSC was doing one gym in. Afterwards, we take a straight path forward to Sabrina with 55s, and Erica even one-ups her despite having a way weaker team. However, sadly, this is where our open-ended gameplay proceeds to collapse, with only 3 successful gyms. Misty drops the ball by falling behind a whole level after Sabrina, and for those who forgot, this is a battle battle that you have to fight your way through for several battles, and the power plant story to even reach. The fact your team has level 49s at all is a crime in itself. Say it with me, gamers, this isn't progression, it's regression. And surprise, but not actually surprise, the same holds up for Janine as well. Fighting your way over to her, dropping from Erica's 56 to a high of 50. Yeah, thank goodness they didn't copy and paste those atrocious levels from GSC. But having a level average that's still below Lance doesn't really signal progression very well, does it? Well, at least the ace ties Lance's. We got that at least going for us. Brock and Blaine, of course, require the most legwork to reach of the first 7, and your reward for doing so is Brock peaking with a 54, which is the same as Misty's highlight, meaning for some asinine reason, the game is regressing comparatively speaking. Again, you're progressing your way over here. You're fighting trainers on your way over here. Meanwhile, Blaine not only has actual gym trainers now, but a 9-level jump across his team for a cap of 59 for whatever reason. But as the Johto games will always have it, this train sadly will not stay on the tracks, as I deceptively lied about earlier, because it does more than just derail, yet it destroys the local forest as well, as now you've gathered the mess of the 7 badges in any order against varying levels that are mostly better but still asking for more. You go find Blue and are greeted with an actual gym this time, which is even newly forced as the last gym you have to go through here. But as for Blue, the only other trainer excluding Red to surpass Lance level-wise in GSC was done dirty for a former champion. From GSC to HGSS, his team's level peak a measly 2 levels. For a penultimate battle, the fact his team caps only a single level above Blaine's is frankly a crime. They had the level increasing momentum all over Kanto and quite literally did the bare minimum here, despite the fact at this point you had to have fought every gym leader to even get here in the first place. Honestly, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever, but that's of course because we still haven't even gotten to Red yet. Just getting to him is exhausting. If you want to grind, I got some bad news, because for regular encounters, the highest available, if I'm capable of reading, would be at Mount Silver itself. Yes, it's an L for Cerulean Cave, but the highest offered, with plenty of unevolved Mons among them, seems to be level 51, a whopping 1 level increase from Johto's Route 43 incident. They unironically expect you to grind on this nonsense, to prep for a battle that itself was needlessly bloated as well, to be frustrating, to put it lightly. But as for Red, what disaster looms? Well, we take that 73 to 81 range, and we have to pump it up to a minimum of 80 and a peak of 88. Look, let's just lie to ourselves for a second and pretend that GSC's Red fight was fine, that the EXP yields weren't complete garbage, that in tandem could function with an EV system that was meant to help you out long term over the course of a game. Okay, cool. So now explain to me why, from whatever acid trip you're on, where a battle like this is made better from higher levels, meaning higher stats, crazy movesets comparatively speaking, hail constantly eating away at your longevity sometimes, full restore spam, and an EV system that doesn't remotely make up for the level gap at all. What are you supposed to do here? You either brute force item spam. Yes, it's a great strategy. It always works because of how easy these games are, being the greatest PP stalling trick in the books. You probably consider bringing out a Mewtwo or the other box art legendary, just to try to get as much of a level advantage as possible, while still remaining underleveled, in a strat that obviously resembles that of the last one. Or you sit down and grind for days, even weeks, for an even higher level line. It's not hard in the traditional sense. If it were just that, then it wouldn't even be a piece of this equation at all. For the only remotely comparable case that we have in the series, Ultra Necrozma is a similar fight difficulty-wise. It feels almost suffocating, but the difference is you have significantly more answers to get around this fight. And when you turn around and look at Red, that list cuts down by over half. And the only reliable answers you have all involve some form of grinding, whether it's items or levels. It does not matter. It's not hard, just tedium. It's bloat made to infuriate the player and inflate game time for a battle that's not even a super boss, but the final boss for the main game part 2. And that's the frustrating part, because without this one battle, Kanto works. Questionably so, but it works. And again, I'm saying this considering Kanto the better region between it and Johto. They took what was inarguably the worst part of Gold and Silver, because Kanto Kanto itself was a little hemorrhoid tacked onto the end of the game and made an extra region that just wasn't fun to play through, since only 2 battles here were even remotely progressing the level curve at all, due to the single worst level balancing the series had ever seen. By the time you reach Kanto, you should already out-level every single generic trainer by a mile, and most of the gym leaders alongside whatever sad excuse of quality control the wild encounters are. And due to Kanto existing, the mon diversity of Johto itself was also compromised because Kanto 2 needed content. HGSS addressed all those issues to some extent and even went above and beyond, but of course, all they had to do was not fumble this battle. And like Prophecy, Game Freak did what they've proven to be great at and ruined something so close to greatness. And for Kanto itself, they didn't even add any forced content in this section whatsoever. It was so easy, if anything, showing why a battle like Red just objectively doesn't work, especially as a gate for actual post-game. Not that there's much of it. Something Gen 5 Cynthia or Emerald Steven simply were not, because they were super bosses. Red is the final boss. The distinction needs to be made, and it really sucks because I want an open-ended game like this have to succeed, but the wild encounters being completely irrelevant due to them never being worth the effort to use, and Red's obscenely unnecessary level jump just cut in and hurt any will to finish the game. Whether it's using new mons or trying to grind up old ones, it's only proving why playing the game on cartridge with a team above a single mon is a death sentence for time, with the only out being PP stalling revive spam style. And it's just further proof why emulation, legally of course, is always gonna be king, because like with Johto, but to a way lesser extent, it removes the inflated filler game time and completely cuts the chain that massively restricts the game's replayability. Well, unless something else slipped by me, that's it for the main Kanto offering, meaning I guess we get to shove off to the content section, one you already know is going to be packed to hell and back. Content bloat. The 2 words I'd use to describe the side content offering the definitive Johto games grant us. It's as content complete as a Pokemon game could get, unironically. But how good is that content? Well, unfortunately, it's all over the place between good and boring. So first, big dumb battling sessions for you to grind for weeks on end, as everything consistently goes wrong. Obviously, we gotta start with Crystal's big claim to fame, and with that, the Battle Tower is here. But not alone this time, thankfully. Because of course, taking notes from Platinum, but not actually, it's just theft. That game's Battle Frontier is here in its entirety, plus a few more move tutor attacks attempting to make that better game obsolete, as the smallest of smallest upgrades to the Battle Frontier. The problem is, it's literally the Platinum Battle Frontier. That's the issue, of course. It's that this Battle Frontier just isn't that good. 5 facilities, same as the last. The Battle Tower, of course, the best iteration of it, stuck with the downside of just being the Battle Tower. Of course, it's the classic 7 battle in a row gauntlet with random spiking difficulties after streaks of none. It suffers from being very uninteresting, which says a lot coming from me because it sounds like I'm throwing stones in a glass house. Accompanying the Battle Tower is the Battle Arcade. Okay, so get this. It's the Battle Tower, but with a wheel inflicting random nonsense upon the players. But it's not really random, meaning it's just 7s again. But due to your ability to time this very easily, it's basically always in your favor with debilitating effects for you to reap the rewards of essentially being the Battle Tower, but easier. And for some reason, doubles is stuck with teams of 3, and you don't have your items. The Battle Castle is a weird resource management take on the Battle Tower. 7 battle streaks again, but this time you gotta earn currency that devs really need to find a better name for. Good lord, stop shortening that shit, please. You can buy heals, items, faux reveals, and the such, but most importantly, ranks to get access to more rewards, adding a degree of strategy that the others simply do not provide at all. Unfortunately, you'll just stop before things get interesting, meaning potential is just potential. The issue with having to buy ranks in order to get the things you want to use. The Battle Hall is probably the least replayable one. 10 back-to-back 1v1s against random mons of a type you select in advance, with easier fights early on and harder ones later. It's a massive game of picking and choosing and luck to hope your only mon, or in doubles 2 of the same mon, can go the distance to keep up with this really long experience that most mons simply cannot do at all. Which lastly ends us with a returning friend from Emerald. The best of this game's 5 being the Battle Factory. 7 in a row, as always, but here, you don't get to use your own mons, instead picking from a set of 6. You only get new mons whenever you defeat foes to trade for them, making this by far the hardest of the bunch, while also simultaneously being the most rewarding to play. And the random nature arguably makes it the most fun as well, demanding the most skill and knowledge, for I would say is objectively the best battle facility we've probably ever had. Again, for some reason, 3 mons on a doubles team, but hey, whatever. It's just a shame that overall hell, we only get one definitively good battle facility, which bogs down the entire offering, making the process of getting battle points from these places just not very thrilling. Especially when you're gonna want those move tutors and the exchange rewards. The grind as always sucks. Of course, it's a necessary evil, sadly a bit pricier than it probably should be. Well, that's it for the battle frontier. That's not all for earning BP, thankfully, as one extra place slips in. The trainer house. Here, you do a fight and earn one battle point. For some reason, this is not limited to 3v3 or 4v4, but rather 3v whatever the hell you have. Well, thankfully, at least capping at level 50. You can take on daily battles against the trainers here, which is a problem as there's only one by default. The gimmick is more trainers will show up here, but only through the use of the Pokewalker, with those trainers' mons from their teams, meaning you could actually battle some very interesting stuff. But again, it's the Pokewalker, so it's always gonna be just the one. You don't know people, quit pretending you do. And while it's not a battle facility of the Pokemon League, as you'd hope, it was able to get a massive upgrade in the post-game. Yes, the Elite Four Round 2 is properly here to make sure Johto's abysmal leveling train wreck is less so. Seriously, who let the Gen 2 chimp end like that with nothing after Kanto? Essentially massive team reworks featuring loads of mons not native to Johto or Kanto, and some gargantuan level jumps that make an actual source of EXP exist, for a much more quality experience doing everything right to the point of being damn near impossible to criticize. But I said damn near because the level laddering here is egregious. High 50s, reaching into the 70s, struggling a lot with trainers like Karen, not even getting a 70, and Lance for some reason not exclusively being 70s plus. But whatever, I guess. Sadly though, the gym leaders didn't get nearly as much of a well thought out system this time, because yes, the gym leaders in the post game also get access to better team, to essentially a similar extent as the Elite Four, just with lower levels. The problem is how poorly implemented the feature is, because to get the quality content, you have to chase down every single individual gym leader across Johto or Kanto during some short time frame across a week to get their number, and then call them during a specific time window throughout the week where no gym leaders have timing overlaps, meaning it's very inconvenient across the board, only making one, potentially none of those fights available at any given point in time, completely ruining what's supposed to be a fun feature. Because if you want to fight Blue, you gotta specifically wait for Sunday night. There is no other time to fight him. The day of the week events are starting to get in the way, and you can see why it could be a problem. Regardless, once you call them, you can go to the fighting dojo, and there you can battle the trainers, or you can ignore them, and once their time window is ended, they will just stay there, defeating the entire purpose of the damn time gating in the first place. Yeah, this is a bit of a joke. Also, Chuck, where are the Johto fighting types, my guy? Come on. Bro, what are you doing? But while we're here, let's just stay on the Poke Gear, because excluding that mess we just saw, it's all upgrades. Firstly, receiving a call does not bring you to a screeching stop anymore due to the DS's dual screen setup. Now, it's just really loud and going crazy on your bottom screen. That's cool, but with calls, this time the phone book is also a bit better. It's here, there is no call book limit, meaning you can now register every trainer in the game to be put here, where previously it was impossible, and you had to kick them out over time to get new ones. The only problem is here in HGSS, you don't have the option to remove the rejects you did not want to add. Regular trainers like the gym leaders still suck, sadly, due to also being tied down to arbitrary day of the week and time nonsense being responsible for the rematches, and generally just being much worse in quality. Also, the free items you can get from Crystal also still apply here from the phone calls. How fun. For more positives, the Pokegears map actually allows you to mark your own indicators for every location in the game for whatever mental note you need, very conveniently showing up on the fly screen. Finally, leaving us with an updated radio screen. There's not much to mention outside of the password show. It's still here. Pokemon swarms are also here, now with even more once Kanto's unlocked, and a new offering influencing the encounter pool to change depending on what music is playing between the two options from Sinnoh or Hoenn music. So yeah, cool. The Pokegear's better, and probably still gonna be something you'd never touch. Moving towards the general features, we have one absent from OG Gold and Silver, the Safari Zone. As always, or until ORAS that is, it's the same 500 monies for 30 balls deal, this time without a step counter. To run off into the grass to catch mons, pissing them off with mud, or feeding them for some reason, you wholesome problem of a person. While as is, it's already providing a pretty mediocre service in order to get plenty of underleveled mons, including mons previously left really late into the game from Gold and Silver's offering. offering, now made even earlier. That's not the up here, because now you can customize the entire area, and you get the ability to change the area's provided terrain. While the layout starts semi-random between new saves, the ability to swap between the 12 layouts is unlocked to give a massive amount of variety through new encounter pools and terrain. But to say picking the selection was all is of course not even doing the system justice, as you can also unlock the ability to place down entire objects, which outside of collision purposes, things get messy here, because this customization also features encounter pool changes, and you can only run up to 30 blocks at a time per area. Placing certain blocks will influence new encounters to join the encounter pool. However, the issue is that loads of those mons take in real life time to show up, and that hard work leaves upon being removed. Technically, the blocks themselves can gain more value through an invisible leveling system, but again, it's something that takes a lot of time. So let's say you want Bagon to appear in the wild. Well, I got some bad news, because it takes almost 4 months to get him to show up. By the time you get it to appear, it won't matter, because you'll already be moving on to better things. HeartGold and SoulSilver is not your life. That's the problem the Johto games in general have. An over-reliance on its daily and weekly events, being far too demanding of your time to craft this illusion of a big, expansive, and evolving world, and all at a cost of making features far more inconvenient in order to make each day unique. It's always here to drag the experience down in the name of immersion. Well, with a point like that, hey look, it's the bug catching contest. Only available on 3 days of the week. You can join a 20-minute contest versus bots in order to get a bug and hope the RNG gods agree in thinking you got something of value. Just like in Gold and Silver, but this time, having the national dex allows for unique encounter pools each day with just new stuff in general. It's a neat improvement with zero drawbacks. Although newly next door is a completely brand new feature, being the Pokeathlon Dome. Here we get 5 different gauntlets of 3 mini-games, all specializing in mons performing in a set manner to score well and win it all. Mons themselves has set in stone stats that are altered by performance-enhancing drugs to allow decent use in most settings, because each minigame has different needs to tackle effectively, all using the touchscreen. Now, as mentioned, we got 5 types of courses for the minigames, with an unlockable harder mode for competing against better teams. Ultimately, you're just here to score the best, and hopefully get what feels like an RNG chance for bonus points to clean sweep the competition. On average, the minigames themselves are pretty fun, but of course a few duds exist. So let's review each and every single one of them now individually, and we're going to order them in a way that I, with my opinion, would say they are from best to worst. So with the best one first, Hurdle Jump. It's just a sprint with frequent hurdles as obstacles to slow your mons down. Itself, it's just a tough balancing act when you got 3 mons to micromanage all at the same time, all to get the lowest team average and win it all. Circle Push is even more 3-mon micromanagement nonsense. This time your goal is pushing foes out of numbered zones to earn points when the clock is up, and of course the highest points win. Here we get another example of how problematic touchscreen controls can be, as moving 1 mon around can be pretty risky because you're gonna lose points. That, or the game just disagrees with you being in the circle. That's the skill issue. Get over it. Relay Run, otherwise known as Tinder Simulator, is just a reason to stack a bunch of speed. All you do is get distance while switching mons out as they get exhausted, while ignoring hazards and the foes that are doing their best hazard impressions. Oh fun, we got more micromanagement. Disc Catch is a jumping simulator you do, in which you perform the action of the game's title, with your goal of collecting discs at the back for a much higher score. Or if you're a real degenerate, depriving everyone of score by grabbing them in the front. Again, dealing with 1-mon controls, although here it could probably be argued it's better this way. Oh boy, Ring Drop. Actual peak fiction. The sheer act of slinging your stylus non-stop at foes, launching them straight to Kanto itself to earn points. Truly immaculate. Honestly, this would be higher if spawn camping the CPUs was not the optimal play. It is so unreasonably easy to cap the score on this one. Snow Throw is just the oddball here. It's just dragging balls across to hit the foes and score. That's really it. You can make larger balls and block with them, but let's be real. You're probably just targeting the team on the left due to how easy it is to aim at them. Block Smash is literally just spamming the stylus, hoping the RNG is throwing cracks in the way of your blocks to punch through more blocks, of course winning when you hit the most blocks. Yeah, this one's very mid. Lamp Jump is a game about hitting some dummy fat combos of several lamps to win with a big number. While strategy does exist, it's bogged down with the controls being not the greatest. Trying to make your mons jump is so unresponsive sometimes. But hey, that leads us to the bad ones. Pennant Capture is just a headache. Flicking controls makes moving feel unresponsive more times than not, just to grab your flags and get body blocked. Or Robbed, just needing to waste more time time to grab more. Obviously the most points win, and this is probably the easiest one to have go wrong. But why stop there when Gold Roll takes my title for the worst Pokéathlon minigame? You're just playing 4-man soccer. Yes, soccer, football is play with your hands. And your goal, of course, is to score and not get scored on. The problem, of course, is dragging Mons with a stylus to actually make the ball go. Just walking the Mon into the ball is usually not enough because how slippery the ball can be. So you need to do a big push to launch the damn thing, which would be fine if aiming were reasonable. It's of course made worse though when you're just trying to reach the ball and the foes are just smacking it as hard as possible, where you don't even get a chance to play the game. They're doing it non-stop, and it's the worst case scenario, especially when it leads to some positions that are impossible to recover balls from, because you can't body block the other Mon. That'd be too easy, making for a miserable experience that unfortunate could not begin to describe. All of which to gain another currency to pick up goodies with a daily rotating stock featuring more after the national dex is had. And because the game fails to value your time, you can only buy one of each item a day. Overall making for a funnish experience with a few ruts, but only when you're not being forced to run it for those damn evolution items. Because hey look, an infinite supply of evolution items instead of just the one like Gen 2 had. Hey, this appears like it could be mandatory. Regardless, that took a while and there's still plenty more to come. Like the copy and paste of the PAL Park. Obviously, it gets used to bring Mons up from Gen 3 to embrace that sentimental value that you needlessly put into, this Pokemon in particular. All to get a pitiful reward at the end and score as well, I guess. Just with the upside of there no longer being a daily transfer cap, something the Sinnoh games lacked, which granted HeartGold SoulSilver's track record is surprising they'd even improve the feature like this. But speaking of bewildering features, we gotta address the heinous crime that I have been taking shots at the last 2-ish years, the game corner. As we see with the international versions of the games, we don't get slot machines here, only because people were too afraid of the horrible gambling pipeline. Here we have Voltorb Flip, and this minigame is actually a lot more fun and strategic than any puny slot machines could ever try to be. Ultimately a puzzle game where you're trying to hit all the 2s and 3s the board offers while dodging Voltorbs. I'm sure this game was based on something, and I'm totally positive there's a reason that I don't know what the source is, some Mario Bros 2 type beats, but this is a fun little puzzle game. Yes, it itself is fun, but there's a glaring issue because that's just how HGSS is. Losing is just astronomically brutal, as not only do you use all your coins lost on the current game, but you can very inconsistently lose game levels for no reason. And yes, this is brutal to keep in mind because how impossible it could be to find correct tiles due to how frequently 50/50s or even 33% appear in the game. But wait, you can quit early and keep whatever you get. Yeah, whatever puny numbers you get could be kept that way, and you'll still lose some if not all of the game's current levels if you quit or flat out lose. And this here is the crime of inconsistency. Regardless, the big downside here is that this is the only way to get any form of coins. Yes, you heard that right, they're not buyable at all, making most of the rewards completely soul draining to get, which by the way, in terms of rewards, the game's Voltorb Flip offerings across Goldenrod and Celadon feature different reward offerings. Look, a pricey Dratini is one thing, but there's no sane individual who's actually gonna grind this game out for a Porygon, much less more than one. Absolutely no shot in hell. And you wanna know why this is nothing more than a twisted joke? Because you actually can buy coins in the Japanese version of the game. Yes, the game that I would hope none of us could read is the definitive version. And sure, slot machines are very mid, especially when you have to sit through a pointless animation every so often, but buying coins means not only are all the rewards actually reasonably obtainable, but infinitely repeatable, because it makes it incredibly easy to just farm your valuable TMs and simply avoid the gambling if you really want to. All of which is because people were too afraid of children gambling, yet those same parents still give kids online casinos through their mobile games or some other heinous means. It's just insulting to see how much this game demands your time for so little. Regardless, we're off to what is a non-downside feature, your mother's banking. Essentially a whole money storage system in the game, and it works exactly as expected. Put money in, take money out. But most importantly, a feature to add a percentage of money earned from battles directly to your bank for later use. That wasn't great enough. HGSS actually altered the system so some of the items you get in this manner would be far more valuable and always pretty much useful, mainly due to the whole Gen 2 bedroom customization thing getting cut. So here it just doubles down in terms of making something actually useful, which is pretty raw. The Abercorn system itself gets a minor rework. Instead of cluttering your main item section of your bag, they're just shoved into a new key item, working essentially unchanged from Gen 2 in terms of fetching Pokeballs, but this time used to make your own illegal substances for the Pokéathlon. Smaller, but better. Berry growing even sneaks its way into the game, still taking real life enough time to do, but this time it's portable, making it harder to forget about your berries, especially if you leave it as a selected key item, just with the hindrance of there only being 4 slots to ever grow your berries in. Moving towards the near useless features, we have Pokeball seals, basically being a cosmetic thing to add more flair to mons, being sent out similar to Pokeball effects. Yeah, that's it. Although getting seals themselves is just not fun because on a daily basis, you can get a random 3 seals from this piece of fictional filth here. Oh, fun. Another feature with even less value, the dress-up game. You can use accessory stuff, make image, and that's it. Getting the props comes from some bozo, which aren't even guaranteed when you pay for them, and from our next feature that otherwise lack value. Pokemon following you. Essentially just a cosmetic thing that lacks any real purpose outside of getting dress-up accessories, or some pointless item that only serves to get you another star for your trainer card. Look, man, this does nothing really, and the defense of this is just really silly. Immersion? Really? Tell that to the mons that clip through walls. Well, technically these models aren't worthless, because they bleed their way into another feature with photo taking. Feature lets you take pictures with your team, and yes, some truly revolutionary stuff right here. The unknown report is just a key item used to make an imaginary side quest for yourself if you get bored, I guess. I don't know, Legends Arceus did it better. Fossil restoration actually shows up as well this time around. Yeah, something useful. Crazy, man. But of course, like with most games, you take a fossil and then bring it back to life to own. It's fossils, dude. For communication features, the Wi-Fi Plaza and the Platinum GTS are here, and because Nintendo wants to ruin the value of our games, are completely unusable now. Which finally leaves us with our last feature, being the Pokewalker. Yes, this silly little pedometer actually came with the game instead of being sold separately to essentially just be a scam. Let's go. What is your deal, buddy? Here, you throw a mon from your system to the funny circle-shaped machine and commit the heinous act of crime that is taking your 142-pound self to go outside and touch grass, or try to walk around indoors, you freak. Essentially, you take steps to earn a currency to use to battle wild mons, or to get some items that can be used to transfer back into the game as a source of, well, items and mines, where each maps have their own exclusive offerings. And with your higher step counter, you can get better mons and items to appear. The courses in question are unlocked from getting those funds and sending them back to the game to do the thing. Ultimately, being a harmless, funnish feature that opens up new possibilities, and it influences another feature. Yeah, that's it. So that's all. That's basically every feature the game has, what it do, and whether or not it matters in the grand scheme of things. Thankfully for us, the easiest W HeartGold and SoulSilver take is their visual and musical offering. In terms of music, the Gold and Silver soundtrack wasn't bad per se, but just had a lack of great highlights, meaning at best you could count out the good or great on your fingers. Here we get some new remixes, most of, if not all, are improvements, not to mention a few others just getting sprinkled in throughout the world. But if these ups weren't enough, during the Kanto arc of the game, once you get all 16 gym badges, you can actually get an item that can be toggled on or off to choose between the HeartGold SoulSilver soundtrack and that of Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Yeah, the original is here as well to inject the good old times straight into your veins. In the musical department, it's a clean sweep. And in the graphical department, the stocks are still on the rise. Essentially an adaptation of the Gen 4 style, but in Johto, but better. Fitting like a glove, feeling just right, both in and out of battle damn near perfectly. And in contrast to their Gen 4 games, the UI takes the approach to prioritize the bottom screen for accessibility reasons, and a second select slot for key items to make fishing easier, the bag itself, etc. It's just all here. The only singular complaint I could even think about is just a hindsight thing with the PC. It's like you pick up the mon and it doesn't pull up the team screen. Again, it's a black and white retrospect thing, but come on. Yes, this is a first world problem that the Gen 5 games handle with bliss. While this section did a great job in terms of the game's experience, we have a lurking problem in the realm of emulation. Thankfully, no Emerald anti-cheat nonsense, but the game just loves corrupting its overworld for merely existing, and eventually just killing the top screen. Yes, it's technically still playable if the world's layout is engraved into your skull, demanding a reset over this massive recording inconvenience, which again is never an issue on official hardware. Just the woes of playing the game without needing to wipe your rear with an overpriced experience from third-party sellers like your meth-addicted neighbor. But that's it for this section, meaning it's time to clown on that Johto narrative, ain't it? To say the Johto's story was passable would be a lie. Quite literally a nothing burger except the growth of a character that was not even your own. Now for the remake, you know they had to go nuts the butts to make an actual narrative this time. And once again, that's just copium. Because get this, the game begins with you getting a mon and fetching an egg while sitting through a new character that only exists to slow the game down and provide nothing to the plot. But now that you've got the Pokedex, it's time to do the gym challenge because you're never completing the damn thing. What do you think this is? And like that, you're grabbing badges and being stopped by obstacles that only exist to make battling the legendary mandatory to beat the game, despite really just being filler. And dealing with a rival who treats his tools like tools instead of Pokemon, for later seeing it as wrong by the time you reach Kanto. And of course, you stop a formerly broken Team Rocket from the Kanto games, but again, while they flail around and cry on the radio begging for Giovanni to return, which never happens. Rubbing salt in the wound is the game's climax being very, very, very anticlimactic. Because unlike basically every other Pokemon game after GSC, the Team Rocket LARPers were unable to succeed their one and only goal, with zero success to any extent. Despite how minor the Fire Red and Leaf Green plotline setup for Team Rocket's return was, it still feels like a spit in the face. Especially when Kanto itself is still back with only a single grunt during its runtime for nothing of plot value. Unfortunately, that much is all the same minus the Komodo girls and their detour for the legendary. Crystal's test for the Dratini and I guess the rival Sprout Tower and Burn Tower dialogue no longer being missable, which then it throws you at Kanto where there's no story at all, despite taking place 3 years later after Red and Blue, or their remakes in this case, ending in a trip up some random mountain labeled as Johto for some reason, despite being completely surrounded by Kanto. Yes, I suppose there's more Johto beneath the earth, all in an effort to fight a former champion simply minding his own business to end the game, granting us a story that can be summed up as treat your pets well, and nothing really else. In terms of side content, there's Yuzine's side quest where he just follows Suicune across Johto and Kanto before letting you live out his dream of catching it instead. Congrats! I'd argue it's worse than nothing, because it's insulting. The only thing even resembling a saving grace, but just being an overhyped illusion, is the Celebi Mystery Gift event, where you get thrown through time to learn that your rival's disdain of Team Rocket comes from being the son of their former leader, before shifting through time again to needlessly battle Giovanni, taking place mid-Goldenrod Tower takeover, where he actually shows interest because he's evil. You forgot about that part, didn't you? Whatever, you still technically do stop him from taking the helm of Team Rocket, and of course, heading out, followed by the sound of splashing water. It really doesn't sound like that though. And if we know anything, if there's no evidence of drowning, it's only headcanon. In fact, this is an event. Is it even canon in the first place? I hope not. This theory sucks, please stop promoting it. And with that, you're back to modern day, meaning congrats, all that happened here was connecting two dots that really did not need to be connected in the first place. And unfortunately showing that the Rocket admins were not fighting a hopeless cause because of course the criminal had no character development over the span of 2 games, leaving the remakes with nothing of value for our main game and the reworked Crystal content. Once again, only leaving the rival to be the hope of a positive across the board. I've said it before and I guess I could say it again. The game's only real narrative takeaway is that feeling a growth over a long adventure kind of vibe. The issue with taking away something like this as the moral of the story is the fact that basically all mainline Pokemon games have this as their vibe, but they feature this little thing called more. Whether it's moral complexity, something a bit more deep, or whatever Scarlet and Violet tried doing. Here it's just as simple as learning your wrongs, but just a little bit better this time, with normal gameplay making up the rest being something that's not new. Funnily enough, however, in this regard of growth, if you count it as narrative, HeartGold SoulSilver actually does it the best in the series by a long shot. Yeah, unfortunately, this is something that the Pokemon Following You feature puts front and center by merely existing, showing itself at every corner of the game as a type of progression, with the 2-act game structure and the photographer actually chime in here to put more emphasis on this. It's just a shame what adds up to is not really narrative, but just more of a vibe, which unfortunately leaves the game's narrative both dry and bad, being obvious granted the whole remake thing, but just an issue nonetheless. Congrats gamers, that's it for HeartGold SoulSilver, the second, well, technically third draft of the Johto experience. And how is it as a whole? Well, we'll see. And at the end, overhyped wouldn't begin to describe Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver's legacy. On one hand, we got remakes that notably upgrades the original experiences across so many aspects, like more to the lands in question, much better game mechanics because remake, improving the actual playthrough experience through many aspects, mainly the mon selection though, stuffing in as much content as humanly possible, being generally pleasing aesthetically, and a minor story improvements. To say every aspect of the game was improved would be a disservice. But on the other hand, end of the game, it's just many bullet wounds dragging down the entire experience. Death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, particularly in all the gameplay sections, from a remedied but still annoying distribution of Johto mons, to a better but still questionable lineup of boss fights, minor backtracking problems, and notable new content being event only, and unhealthy amounts of grinding in those times where the level curve just comes to a complete halt. It's just a drag that goes on for too long, but most importantly, the ruination of good features with just inconvenient restrictions. The highs are high, and the lows sure are very plentiful, sinking the ship to be low lows. All these come together for a melting pot of mid, not even getting close to that title of best Pokemon games that are needlessly tacked onto these titles. But why is that? Well, one reason feeds into another, but it's because the game's success, as obvious as it may seem, is nostalgia. But of course, it's not that simple, as it's a specific type of nostalgia that we have to see, because the modern discourse of HGSS paints the game as bad, yet it can still be a top 5 or even top 3 game in the right lens and hands. Okay, technically this applies to all games, but more so here with less subjectivity. Think about the people pushing the debate. Nostalgia is the weapon and the misdirection. The praise comes from players who got the correct experience of HeartGold and SoulSilver. They didn't have the guillotine of time itself looming over their head. They had the time to just take everything in. The time that makes grinding a non-issue. The time that lets you play for days on end and never worrying about the day of the week events. The time that just lets the world truly feel alive. Because that's where the game succeeds. It's good when you actually have the time to put up with this stuff. Time is ultimately the difference maker. Through external means, technically you can remove the time grinding, but sadly this doesn't fix all the issues. So again, you're only removing grinding, everything else still stands. And this is a relatively realistic perspective to be in. But if you try it as vanilla as possible in this realistic living life as an adult type of scenario, playing the game as the way it was intended just ends up being miserable. Playing the game the way it's intended is just miserable, because you're not able to just dick off for the daily events. Grinding is just absolutely horrific, because life simply be your rightful focus. You simply don't have the time to grind for 2 weeks just to battle Red, much less all the other spots in the Pokemon League. It just becomes impossible to get a truly decent experience out of the games, in contrast to the newer games that drop all these principles entirely. And we're only recently at the point where we're seeing the game's true colors. It's only remembered fondly through nostalgia, unless you're living through that phase right now, where it's just bad-ish otherwise, leading to easily the most volatile Pokemon experience there probably ever will be. Meaning it's time for our ratings. And here, it's still a 3-star experience. Just with it an X and Y, it's a little rival in quality, pushed up a little bit. And for our rating of should you play it, we will keep it as a yes, as it's truly an experience that cannot be replicated anywhere, that truly puts its OG counterparts in the dirt. Plus the game's like a luck of a draw. You might love it or hate it. It's perfectly balanced as the reference goes. Which leaves us with my thoughts. Of course, the reason you're even here to begin with, because I said so. And here, I've put way too much time into these games. I'd argue confidently more than 99.8% of you. A long time since launch day, and I really liked it once, and it took around 2016 to turn to it and go meh, just with much better games around, and most importantly, not the time for it. Why would I care? Playing the game just ends up sucking, and with it beat, it's an okay experience. Fine enough to be my main source for something much more enjoyable. Plus, in terms of the channel, the original video I did on these games was important, despite being outlandishly not good at all. A fire to spark the flame where we are now. A very valuable experience long term that technically isn't even over yet as a video itself. And while I was initially gonna sparkle a few more positives of my own here, that had to be cut short, because in some kind of cosmic evil, when fetching footage for this video, I had a random save file corruption out of nowhere, when all I needed to do was fetch some Pokewalker footage. Having this happen with your save file from several years, it hurts. All that sentimental value, right down the toilet. But yeah, it's a symbol. The game is begging me to prove everything I said in this video right, just one more time. It's frankly disgusting. Well, congrats gamers, that's all. The long-awaited course correction to set the record straight, and just like that, I hope it was enough for you. Again, maybe I did miss something, because holy hell, the size of this game is bonkers. So, yeah, comment or something, I don't know. And if you liked the video, subscribe, or something again, whatever. But regardless, thank you for watching, but actually this time, and until next time, could we please just get a linearized Johto remake? The game's biggest problem is quite literally being too samey. The whole quote from the Game Freak staff about keeping the game the same or not changing it too much. It's just a wound to keep a bad experience as bad as possible. You could be better.